We're going to talk about what has happened in Ukraine on this day of the Russian invasion. We'll examine the actions and the strategies, both military and political. Now, if this is your first time watching, my name is Darren Gertis. I'm a professor who's built multiple leadership programs at Charleston Southern University. So, we'll also view these events through the lens of leadership. And I also wrote a book about Zelensky called I Need Ammunition, Not a Ride, and you can find it on Amazon.
I'm going back a couple days. I didn't talk about this 2 days ago, June 28th, but Russia warned Ukraine that attempts to retake Crimea will be seen as a declaration of war. And I almost choked when I read this headline because, like, if you broke into my house and then you were beating my family and you said, "Look, if you hit me back, if you touch me, I'm going to hit them harder." I'm going to touch you. I'm going to hit you even harder. I mean, what's the threat of the declaration of war here? Okay, so what? They're going to mobilize? Putin doesn't want to mobilize. If he mobilizes, public opinion will turn against him because this is going to affect more people in Russia. Putin has so far maintained that this invasion amounts to a special military operation, not an official declaration of war. So it changes it a little bit. I can't call up everyone, but yeah, maybe he can call up everyone. He said this, for us, Crimea is part of Russia, and it shall be forever. Any attempt to encroach on Crimea is a declaration of war on our country. That was Dmitry Medvedev said that, and I mean, I was just baffled by that. Okay, let me go on to today's news. Today is the 30th. Here is a deep state map. And if you look at the deep state map day over day, you see this ongoing, continual encroachment on Lusatians, and it's really bad. Okay, so here's what's going on there. Al Jazeera talking about daily events. Rescuers are attempting to evacuate residents from the frontline eastern city of Lysychansk with about 15,000 people remaining in the city. They are running out of time, and when they captured Lysychansk, it's a short step to controlling all of the Luhansk, and they'll be able to declare some sort of victory. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry condemned Syria's decision to recognize eastern regions as independent. Yeah, I'd be smoked too if I was in Ukraine. I'd be very upset with Syria. They called it an unfriendly act, an encroachment on its sovereign territory and territorial integrity, gross violation of Ukrainian law, the UN Charter, fundamental norms and principles of international laws. You know, it would be like if they just seized that little section of Russia that is off near Lithuania and Poland and just seized it and said, hey, we're declaring it its own People's Republic. This is the Lithuanian Little People's Republic or whatever else. If they did that, Russia would be incensed. Same kind of thing. President Zelensky cut off relations with Syria on June 29th over the decision. Okay, China and Russia want to create a G7 alternative. Now, this is news and RT. This is Russian state television news, and this is an English translation website of that. And this is not really news. This is what they've wanted to do. Russia has said for some time that it wants to have a bipolar world. I don't mean that in a funny sense. I mean that, like, as opposed to a unipolar world where the US leads, they want to have like the counterbalance that the Soviet Union used to have. And they want to, reignite something like that. So here, China and Russia want BRICS. BRICS are the club of like Brazil and Russia and India and China, this club of these five major countries to expand. Brazil, India, and South Africa is also included in that list, and they want to kind of create a counterbalance to the G7. Moscow's been trying to strengthen and expand this alliance with nations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. BRICS into an alternative to the G7 after Russia was kicked out of what was formerly the G8. So Russia used to be part of the club until it invaded Ukraine in 2014, and then it was kicked out. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova announced that two more nations, Argentina and Iran, have applied to join the group. Well, that sounds like a great club to be in. Quote, while the White House was thinking what to disconnect, ban, or spoil in the world. So she told us. The head of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the State Duma argued on Monday that although the BRICS doesn't declare this, it is capable of becoming an alternative and even a counterweight to the G7 in the future as it unites the leading countries of the non-Western world. It is capable of doing that. That is possible, but I don't think that's what's going to happen. I'll tell you why in a second. President Xi described the BRICS as a counter project and a big family as opposed to the US-led alliances, which he branded hegemonic little circles. She's got to be really careful here because he doesn't want to lose his biggest trading partner in the United States. Now, here's what I think will happen. I think this won't come out like Russia wants it to come out. Like Russia wanted to walk away with Ukraine and unite the pieces of his former empire. And instead, I think he's going to be a vassal of China when this is all said and done, and isolated by the world community and be kind of a pariah like North Korea. I don't think it'll be quite like North Korea, but China's going to wear the pants in the family when this is all over. Okay, this was terrible. I mean, this is Radio Free Europe talking about what's going on in Russia's accused of genocide after fast-tracking adoption of Ukrainian children. So they have about 2,000 orphans that have been forcibly taken to Russia following the invasion. Whether they're orphans or just kidnapped, taken there, Moscow's introducing new laws that will fast-track adoption. When you say genocide, you're talking about killing an entire population. This is culturally some similar kind of cultural genocide where you're taking these people from there. Now, Russia has a history of this. They did this to the Tartars in Crimea back in the 1940s, something along those lines. This is not a new thing for Russia. Okay, here, the West violated a key NATO-Russia treaty, says Lavrov. Sergei Lavrov, he's always a good time. Neither Russia nor NATO has ever formally denounced the 1997 Founding Act, but in practice it does not work because the bloc is in the violation of it, says Sergei Lavrov. Okay, so what are we talking about? The decisions, the Founding Act is this thing like, so Jim Baker, who was the Secretary of State to President Reagan at least, and maybe Bush, yeah, I guess Bush as well. Jim Baker he essentially promises, just talks to Gorbachev saying, look, we're not going anywhere past the German border. NATO is not going anywhere. That's not our desire. Now, the Soviet Union then collapses. I mean, like falls apart. Soviet Union is no more. Legally, it's not an entity. And NATO expands. Now, when NATO expands, what was said before there's no contractual something with the other side. The first charter or the founding act here is something that was kind of like, yeah, this isn't our intent. But these Eastern European countries ran into the arms of NATO. It's almost like an abused girlfriend who's beaten up by her biker gang boyfriend who runs to the football player for protection, and like she ran away from you, dude. She's not that into you. And that's what was going on with Poland and Romania and all these other the Baltic states, all these former Soviet countries, because during Soviet times they took them over. It wasn't like they were like, yay, we're one big happy family. It didn't work like that. Okay, so here's another quote. The decisions that were taken in Madrid grossly violate the terms of the Founding Act, which again, we're not going to spread to the east. But why were these decisions taken in Madrid? Because Russia is invading Ukraine. So to say like, oh, they're violating this act, well, there's a reason why they are moving these forces over into these Eastern European countries. Grossly violate the terms of the Founding Act. First of all, the parts regarding NATO's obligation not to host on permanent basis any significant troops in the territories of the new, meaning Eastern European member states, Lavrov said. Okay, so he's right, but there's a precipitating event that caused that you're kind of overlooking, and if you don't factor that in, you can't really complain about this. Okay, the key treaty was adopted as NATO was planning to expand in Europe, triggering concerns from Russia. Moscow said doing so would violate prior assurances, that's what I was talking about from Baker, and that the alliances would not move past a unified Germany, and that posed a threat to Russia's national security. The first post-Cold War wave of NATO enlargement that incorporated the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland into the bloc came 2 years later, with more waves following against Russian objections. Of course they're objecting, because they're the biker gang guy who wants his girlfriend back, and she doesn't want to go back. Russia fully suspended its office in NATO's headquarters in Brussels Brussels in October 2021 after the organization kicked out 8 Russian diplomats for allegedly working with Russian intelligence. Allegedly, right? So, I mean, come on, your hands aren't exactly clean. So you're complaining about this, but RT's carrying this like, see, the West is to blame for this. They're violating this. Okay, let's keep moving. Russia now, this is RT again, Russia warns of a new Iron Curtain. What do they mean? The Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov says that the EU destroyed relations with Moscow, built over decades, practically overnight. He forgot to mention that it was because Russia invaded its neighbor Ukraine and caused all this disarray in the world. But, set that aside. His Belarusian counterpart, Vladimir Maki, added the Iron Curtain is now being erected by Westerners themselves. Okay, so he's kind of right in the sense that they are putting these sanctions up and that kind of thing. But if you forget the rest of the story, it doesn't really make sense. Uh, I can only say that from now on, we will not trust neither the Americans nor the EU. We will do everything necessary so we don't have to be dependent on them in critical sectors. What he's saying is we're going to be independent within our economy, not dependent on the West, which is a backwards way of saying they won't give us any stuff or trade with us anymore, so we're just going to do what we can with what we have, which is a terrible place to be because you grow by greater productivity and free trade, and they cannot trade nearly as effectively anymore. The last paragraph was really insightful to get into the minds of how the Russians are thinking about this. Western historiography holds that the original Iron Curtain was destroyed in 1989 when the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of Germany, followed by the collapse of the USSR 2 years later. Yeah, no, it's not just Western historiography. That's really when this all fell apart, and that's when the Soviet Union broke up, and there was freedom in Poland and Lithuania and all these other states that fled to the protection of the West. So that's what's going on. But this is how it's being understood in Russia in state TV. So it's helpful to understand. Okay, here's the big news from today. The Russian invaders retreat from Snake Island. Okay, the Russian invasion forces have evacuated the remains of the garrison from the occupied Snake Island. Remember, Snake Island was a Russian warship. Go bleep yourself. In the second day of the invasion, during the night, as the result of another successful military operation carried out by our missile and artillery forces on Snake Island, the enemy rushed to evacuate the remains of its garrison by 2 speedboats, and it looks like they've left the island. The commander said. Okay, so. This is Interfax Ukraine. They're explaining what happened. Now they've bombed the crap out of Snake Island since they got the proper weapons. They hit it with either a plane or a drone early, and then they got the long-range rocket systems, and they just keep pummeling it. They sunk a tugboat, and if you don't believe me, go watch Denis Davdov, and I'm going to show you why I'm telling you don't if you don't believe me in just a moment. But go watch Denis DENYS DAVYDOV, I believe, on YouTube, and he does these great videos about every day about what's going on militarily in Ukraine, and you can see with your own eyes the thing being hit. Okay, so the Russians are getting hit and they get chased off the island. Now, let's add a little bit to this. This is Radio Free Europe on the same topic. Ukraine takes control of Snake Island. Okay, Ukraine says forces have forced Russian troops off Snake Island. Now, Moscow is calling the withdrawal of its forces a gesture of goodwill to show the country isn't impeding efforts to allow the export of agricultural products. Really? That's what it is. By the way, it's only 40 kilometers off Ukraine's coast, and you don't really need to know much more about it other than that. It's just this island, and it's a strategic point. If the Russians control it, they can send their artillery, and they put their artillery on the island, and then they got blown up because that was kind of a threat, and the Ukrainians weren't dealing with it. Okay, so here's RT again, Russian television. Russia makes goodwill gesture to alleviate the food crisis. That's the headline? You got bombed off the island, and that's your headline. Okay. Russian military has withdrawn from the Black Sea island it captured, claiming it was for the sake of grain freight traffic. Okay, that's called lying. Quote, This demonstrated to the international community that the Russian Federation does not hinder the UN effort to organize a humanitarian corridor to ship agricultural products from the Ukrainian territory, says Colonel General uh, Igor Konashenkov. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Western nations and Ukraine have been accusing Russia of blocking seaborne exports from Kiev-controlled ports like Odessa, claiming that it was a major factor in the global hike in food prices. That's truly what's been happening. So it's not just a claim. It's Ukraine, Russia insists, which has prevented foreign ships from arriving and leaving its ports. Ukraine's use of old sea mines, which are prone to coming untethered during storms, create major problem for traffic, Moscow argued. Well, yeah, they're there because of your warships. So that's what's going on. I mean, again, they're telling half the story. If you only tell half the story, it comes out all skewed, and that's what they're doing here. Kyiv reportedly launched at least two major attempts to retake the island from Russia. Russian troops reported inflicting serious damage on their opponents in both cases. Moscow rebuked the Ukrainian operations as senseless attempts by the Ukrainian government to score publicity points. Okay, let's go back. Two major attempts to retake the island. I don't know if there was an assault, but they bombed them to smithereens a few times. Like you can see the craters in the islands if you look in the videos. I mean, and so they're just not telling the truth. They're certainly not telling the whole truth, but I don't think they're just even telling the truth. This was not for goodwill. This was get out of there. Now, I hope the Ukrainians don't actually take that ground and like sit on it because just, I mean, they can be bombed too, and that would be bad. Okay, Medvedev comments on the West's war crimes. Okay, so we're talking about war crimes now. Former Russian leader says an attempt to threaten a nuclear nation is risky business, and he's threatening war crimes. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next one here where Putin's accusing Ukraine, again, of crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity? What's he mean? Well, and again, if you watch RT, and you can't really get RT unless you go to Rumble. Go to Rumble and then look up RT Russian television, and you can find the channel there. And I watch it, and there's like whenever there's not news on, there's this filler about the war in Donbass. From 2014 and why the Russians had to do what they did to protect the innocents and that kind of thing. Okay, so it's more of this kind of propaganda. Kyiv's actions against Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics amount to, quote, crimes against humanity and effectively constitute genocide of local population. Okay, so what was actually going on there? There was a civil war that was propped up by the Russians who invaded after 2014 and were there supporting the local residents who were anti Ukraine or anti-Kiev government in Ukraine, and so there were Russians in there and not marked. They were called Little Green Men because they weren't wearing any Russian attire. They were in camouflage, but no Russian identifying garb. Okay, so here's Putin saying, with this approach, we could avoid a crisis such as the current one in Donbass that is happening to protect its residents from genocide, and there can be no other definition for the Kiev regime's actions than a crime against humanity. Okay, so that's what he's talking about. And the background again, Russia sent these troops in on February 24th, citing Kyiv's failure to implement the Minsk agreements. What were the Minsk agreements? These were a ceasefire brokered by, I think, the French and the Germans so that they would stop killing each other in Donbass. And it didn't really alleviate anything. It just kept combatants apart a little bit, but not fully. Okay, former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has since admitted that Kyiv's main goal was to use the ceasefire to buy time to create powerful armed forces. Okay, it sounds terrible, but actually, they got serious about arming themselves. Let's not look at the Minsk Treaty. Let's look back before that at the Budapest Memorandum. The Budapest Memorandum was in 1995, and in 1995, the Ukrainians gave up their nuclear arsenal with the guarantee from the United States, Britain, and Russia to guarantee their borders, that they would never be invaded. And Russia's doing it. So again, they're telling only one part of the story. If you look at the Minsk Treaty and say, well, they're not holding up the Minsk Treaty. What about the Budapest Memorandum where they gave up their nukes and you were going to guarantee their borders and then you invaded? So, it's a little bit of the pot calling the kettle black. By the way, I just looked this up, and here let's go to Wikipedia and just type in deaths in Ukraine since 2014. That's all I typed in, and so it'll talk about what happened since 2014 in Ukraine. Civilians, about 3,000 killed. So that's between 2014 and 2021, just before the invasion. Okay, so that's not good. I mean, that's bad. There's a legit civil war that was going on between these eastern districts and the rest of Ukraine. I get that. Okay, now to put that in perspective, in let's see, 4 months now, about 4 months, we have about 5,000 civilians killed that the UN knows of, and there's going to be probably double that we'll find that have been killed, but we just haven't been able to calculate that. So in 4 months, you have many more times this. Now, how about on the ZSU and NGU? These are the Ukrainian forces, about 4,000 and about 4,600, 4,400, 4,600. So about 9,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed in this time, and about 6,500 DPR and LPR, that's these breakaway districts, soldiers or militia killed in this time. Now, if you compare that against the at least 15,000 or so Russian soldiers killed in the last 4 months, and the Ukrainian numbers are something more like 30,000, but they're also including the militia from the DPR and LPR. If you count those together, or like whatever those numbers are, let's somewhere between 15 and 30. Let's just make it very broad. In 4 months, and he's talking about genocide. Like, you're inflaming that, if anything. And then that's not including the Ukrainians killed on this side, which is probably maybe 2/3 of the amount, maybe half. I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but the Ukrainian forces, and then you got to add the innocent civilians that are just wantonly targeted. So if Putin wants to talk about genocide, crimes against humanity, he's creating crimes against humanity. Shooting a missile